All right, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. We are very excited that all of you have joined us for this program that is presented in partnership with by Georgia Audubon and the Amphibian Foundation, two conservation organizations that are based right here in the Atlanta area. So we're going to be talking about backyard conservation and protecting Georgia's native wildlife. And so we will, before we start, as some of you have discovered, there is a Q&A function. But this is for the students who are joining. This is a webinar format. So that means that your picture, unlike a Zoom meeting or a classroom, your picture is not going to pop up. You are only going to be able to see and hear us. And there are ways to be able to both see the presentation and see the images of us talking. But just so for those of you who can't see us right now, I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so you can see our faces, the faces of the presenters here before we jump into our program. So we'll go ahead and go around and introduce ourselves. My name is Karina Newsom. I am the Community Engagement Manager for Georgia Audubon. Georgia Audubon is a wildlife conservation organization that is dedicated to protecting birds specifically. And our goal is to create spaces where both birds and people thrive throughout the state of Georgia. And so a lot of our work surrounds particularly education, research, and conservation surrounding birds. So I'll go ahead and pass it now to Crystal Mandika. Oop, your audio, Crystal. Oop. Let's see. Why don't we go ahead and start with Kiana so that Crystal can get her audio plugged in. So we'll go ahead and get started with Kiana next.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Kiana Leverett. I am the Education Program Coordinator for Georgia Audubon, and I'm so excited to be working with the Amphibian Foundation today. And I'm so excited all of you guys are here.
All right. How about now? Can you guys hear me? Great. Awesome. Like Karina said, my name is Crystal Mandika, and I am the Director of Education for the Amphibian Foundation. Right now, amphibians are disappearing from around the world due to disease and habitat loss. And the Amphibian Foundation is a nonprofit corporation that's committed to developing lasting changes to the global amphibian extinction crisis.
Alrighty, and I will wrap it up with intros. Leave as everyone does now. I'm Henry Adams. I am the Assistant Director of Education here at the Amphibian Foundation. I am so grateful and excited to be working with this amazing team between the Amphibian Foundation and Georgia Audubon. We are so excited to be bringing you all of this educational content. I'm mostly in charge of developing virtual education with Crystal, and just excited to be here today. Thank you all so much for being here.
All right, so with that, we are going to go ahead and get started. Again, really excited that you all are here. We're going to be talking about conservation throughout Georgia, and we are going to start this program by kind of highlighting why Georgia is special. So even among the states across the country, across the continent of North America, Georgia is very special. We have some very unique ecosystems in our state. And so we're going to be walking you through from north to south, the different ecosystems that you can find in the state of Georgia and some of the notable wildlife that exists in those ecosystems. And so we're going to get started first with Kiana, who is going to start us off in North Georgia.
Awesome. So North Georgia is honestly most affectionately called the North Georgia Mountains. And there are two different kinds of mountain habitat in North Georgia. One is the Blue Ridge and two is the Appalachian part of the mountains. And it is a mixed conifer habitat, meaning that there are multiple evergreen trees that are in the upper mountains and a diverse riparian understory, which are shorter other trees that fill in the gaps between those conifer trees. And these mountains are the direct result of millions of years of erosion, which is basically rain falling and trickling down and weathering the rocks into different shapes. And so as a result of that, we have a lot of rivers, valleys, mountain bogs, which are very unique to North Georgia, and gorges as well, which are very deep, sharp ravine-like valleys. And so there are two different kinds of mountains. There's upper mountains and lower mountains. And the biggest difference is that upper mountains are where you're going to find the majority of conifer trees, or like I said, the ones that are evergreen, as well as more weathering and erosion. So steeper peaks, more jagged edges, a lot more rock faces, as well as a diverse flower population and a lot of animals and plants that are tolerant to moderately wet and cold weather. And in the lower mountains, you're going to have more warmth, more sun, more fertile soil, and more hardwood trees, which are deciduous, which are trees that change colors and lose their leaves in the fall and then regrow back in the spring. And the major threats to this habitat are diseases on these trees that affect them. One of the biggest ones is hemlock woolly adelgid. That's the picture in the top right-hand corner, as well as the destruction of essential habitats through invasive species of animals, such as feral hogs and wildfire.
All righty, and so now we're going to transition more into the middle area of Georgia, which has this a really amazing, unique geological feature known as the fall line. I was just visiting my friend in Austin, Texas, and I learned that Austin, Texas also has a fall line. What's really cool about this feature in Georgia is that it is a dramatic shift in elevation, going from roughly, it's relatively a 600-foot shift in elevation that's about 20 feet wide, as you can see here in the map to the right, at the very middle of Georgia, separating the Piedmont from the coastal plain. This actually is the ancient shoreline of the Atlantic Ocean back when the dinosaurs were around roughly 65 million years ago. There are a lot of beautiful waterfalls at this area, and there are a lot of really cool transitions between habitats. You kind of move from the hardwood forest that Kiana was kind of talking about in terms, in North Georgia and the Piedmont, to the more coastal plain habitats that Karina is going to talk about later on. And that transition in different habitats is known as an ecotone. And one of our favorite ecosystems that exists in this middle area in Georgia is the longleaf pine flatwood system. The longleaf pine flatwood system is a really beautiful and diverse system that is dominated, as you might have surmised, by the longleaf pine, Pinus palustris. Most of these systems are very moist soil having. These soils are, they maintain a lot of water throughout the year, very poor drainage. They often have really cool wetlands similar to those mountain bogs that Kiana was talking to us about earlier. Just a little bit different, a little, lower in latitude. They are enormously biodiverse, meaning that there are a large number of different species of flora and fauna that exist in these habitats, including but not limited to tons of plants, such as these really cool pitcher plants. The soils in these flatwoods are not particularly nutrient rich, so plants have evolved to find different ways of getting the nutrients that they need. So some of them, like these pitcher plants, have evolved to be carnivorous. Unfortunately, the longleaf pine flatwood system is a highly endangered ecosystem with roughly only about 3% of its original 90 million acres existing today. The decline of this system has largely been caused by European colonialism in North America, commercial timber harvests, and the continued urbanization throughout the Southeast. If you look to the right, this is the historic range of the longleaf pine in the Southeastern United States. And like I was saying earlier, the flatwood pine flatwoods are enormously biodiverse, having tons of plant diversity with orchids and pitcher plants and other herbaceous vegetation, meaning any sort of plant that grows close to the ground. They also have some of our favorite wildlife species, being the red-cockaded woodpecker up in the upper right-hand corner, the gopher tortoise in the middle left, and then the frosted flatwood salamander at the bottom left. So the red-cockaded woodpecker is a really phenomenal animal and a focus of a lot of conservation initiatives for ornithologists in the southeastern United States. They're a really unique social animal in that they live in family groups, which is pretty distinctive. Oftentimes offspring from the year previous will actually stay with their parents and help raise the offspring of that year. That is a really uncommon behavior, making this animal so cool. They are also what is known as an ecosystem engineer, meaning that they construct habitat that other animals can use. So these are primary cavity builders, meaning that they are the ones to hollow out cavities in living pine trees that other animals will use. And because of the amount of contribution that they have to their ecosystem, they are known as a keystone species, just a species that just contributes so much to their habitat, to their ecosystem. And without them, that entire system can be thrown out of balance. And unfortunately, this animal, like the longleaf pine flatwood system, was once very widespread, numbering in the millions. Now there are only a few thousand, but a lot of really great conservation efforts are being put into having their populations rebound. There's a lot of great work in restoring longleaf pine systems, as well as constructing man-made cavity nests for these woodpeckers to use. And then we'll wrap up with Middle Georgia and the Flatwoods with the frosted flatwood salamander, one of the absolute favorite species here at the Amphibian Foundation. Like the flatwood system and the red-cockaded woodpecker, this is also a species that is threatened due to habitat loss. They are known as a mole salamander, which is the name that we give to the Ambystomatidae group of salamanders, meaning that they love to burrow throughout most of the year. You can find these, well, really, you can't find these typically through most of the year. They are going to be underground, often utilizing old crawfish burrows. But they do emerge during the breeding season, which is in middle December through late January. So in that winter breeding season period, well, they move from their more underground woodland habitats to seasonal or ephemeral wetlands, meaning that those wetlands only fill up with water at certain times a year, meaning that they also exclude certain really important predators to amphibians. So these are really important breeding habitats for not only frosted flatwood salamanders, but amphibians as a whole.
All right, so now we are going to move to the southernmost portion of Georgia, to the coastal plain, which actually takes up the most space compared to the other kind of ecosystems and regions we were talking about in more middle and northern Georgia. And the coastal plain extends from the fall line, which again used to be where the Atlantic Ocean was, where it kind of touched the land in Georgia, to where it touches the land in Georgia now. A lot of people don't realize it, but Georgia does have a coast on the Atlantic Ocean, and the coastal plain extends from the fall line all the way to the coast. And this region of Georgia was actually formed over millions of years, similar to what Kiana described, from the erosion that took place. That water that was moving through the mountains carried sediment, crushed up rock, spine pieces of dirt to the edge of the ocean until it built up and built up and built up over a long period of time, giving us now the coastal plain and moving that coast much further south than it used to be. And this coastal plain area is very, very flat. Now, the coastal plain is really well known for having a variety of different kinds of ecosystems, but wetlands are definitely our thing in the coastal plain. We have both freshwater and saltwater wetlands. When it comes to freshwater wetlands, wetlands that have, of course, freshwater in them, we've got some really notable ones. If you've ever heard of the Okefenokee Swamp, this is actually the largest swamp on the entire continent of North America. It's about 438,000 acres. And just to kind of help you wrap your mind around how big that really is, a football field, right? 100 yards from end zone to end zone is about 1.5 acres almost. So it would take 300,000 football fields to fit in the Okefenokee Swamp. And that is right here in Georgia. Now, I also mentioned that we have saltwater wetlands, and these saltwater wetlands are on the coast of Georgia. Georgia has 100 miles of coastline, which is really awesome. Great places to explore if you're looking for that. And on that 100 miles of coast, we have about the same amount of saltwater wetlands, about 400,000 acres of salt marshes. Wetlands on the coast are referred to as salt marshes. And these salt marshes are different from the freshwater wetlands that I talked about, like the Okefenokee Swamp, because it's tidal. And that means that twice a day, the water level will rise and fall because it is right at the edge of the ocean. And the ocean, of course, has tides. And Georgia has really extreme tides. So the difference between low tide and high tide can be 6 to 8 feet, right? So you have to live out in these salt marshes and on the coasts of Georgia and any of our coasts in the United States, you have to be really well adapted to an environment that changes twice a day pretty significantly. And there are actually hundreds of species that are adapted for that kind of environment: birds, insects, mammals, reptiles, fish. And I want to focus on a couple of some of my favorites members of the salt marsh. So the diamondback terrapin is an aquatic turtle species that lives in the salt marshes of Georgia. And on the rightmost side of the screen, what you're seeing there is a baby diamondback terrapin that is kind of nestled in the marsh grass, hiding in the mud, very well hidden from potential predators. They have a really beautiful shell pattern, as you can see in the adult on the left-hand side. They are a threatened species, which means that human activities, in addition to causing climate change, have caused their populations to decrease, mainly because we have built up buildings and cities in the places where they used to live. But in the marsh that remains, that marsh grass is providing important cover. And this is one of my favorite pictures of a diamondback terrapin. On the right-hand side, I was doing some research out on the coast, and I came across a baby diamondback terrapin in my path, and they are really good at sucking themselves into their skin there, but you can see kind of how small they are. Not only do they use the marsh grass for cover, but they will move around in the marsh grasses looking for food, which include things like snails and fiddler crabs. Now, when it comes to birds, one bird that is very near and dear to my heart, because this is actually a species that I study for graduate school, is called the seaside sparrow. And this bird lives in the salt marsh along with the diamondback terrapin, and they will build their nests in the grass made of grass. And as you can see here on the right-hand side, we've got some young, about 4-day-old hatchlings that are in the nest. And they're really good at the splits, as you can see from that picture. And seaside sparrows have some really cool adaptations for living in the salt marsh, specifically when it comes to how and where they build their nest. So they have to basically find the perfect height off the ground when it comes to the way they build their nest. If they put their nest too low, the high tide that happens twice a day will flood their offspring and they will lose their nest. However, if they nest too high in the grass, they become visible to predators such as raccoons, which you see here on the leftmost side of the screen, and American mink right there in the center. So they have to find the perfect balance to successfully nest. So now we're going to go ahead and move over to the major threats that birds are facing in the state of Georgia.
All right, so one of the biggest threats to birds everywhere, but specifically in Georgia, is habitat loss and fragmentation. Habitat loss is just habitat completely disappearing, being depleted, or not being viable, which basically means not being good for the specific animals that need that habitat or that area. And fragmentation is different because fragmentation is basically fractioning up one large habitat into smaller and then smaller habitats to where it's not one large continuous habitat and connects for these animals to be able to spread out in larger areas. And as a result of that, nesting and wintering grounds can be covered by non-native fauna. That top picture is a kudzu infestation, which is a really popular invasive plant out here that can overtake a landscape very, very quickly. And a lot of times the birds and reptiles and amphibians and animals that are native to these places depend on the native plants and the native ecosystems that are available in those areas. And so when they're not viable and they're not what they need to be for these animals, they tend to not be able to go through this. And they also have to deal with being in urban spaces when there is no habitat for them. As you can see, that bird is nesting on top of a street light, as well as when they're in these smaller spaces, there's more competition when it comes to nesting all in the same space. And two major urban threats to these animals would be the overpopulation of predators. So a lot of people don't realize it, but cats are a major predator of birds. They kill up to 1 million birds every single day just by being let out or by being feral in the streets. And these urban animal populations going unchecked can ultimately really hurt these populations because they're not used to being predated, which basically means being predator attacked, or being able to be a part of that ecosystem. The cats aren't meant to be in that ecosystem, as well as light pollution and window collisions. In urban spaces, there's always a lot of light, and the light, specifically at night, can confuse migrating birds. And then windows, which are meant to look invisible, oftentimes you'll see birds colliding with these windows because they're trying to fly straight and they don't see anything in front of them because of the clear glass.
And then a lot of the, oh, no, here we go. And here we go. Okay. A lot of the threats that herpetofauna are faced with are very similar to those threats that are relevant to birds. Like Kiana was talking about, habitat loss and fragmentation is still very, very relevant to herpetofauna. As we were talking a little bit about with the frosted flatwood salamanders, a lot of salamanders move from woodland habitats to wetland habitats during their typical breeding process. And so sometimes they will have to cross human structures such as roads, which of course can be extremely detrimental to their survivorship. As Kiana was also talking about, non-native predators, cats kill millions of herpetofauna a year. And also environmental pollutants such as pesticides and sediment pollution can really alter the environment and elevate stress in herpetofauna. And as we all know, stress can be a major, stress is a killer. Also really relevant, as Crystal was mentioning earlier, infectious diseases, specifically chytrid fungus, is playing a really significant and unique role in the conservation statuses of amphibians worldwide. We haven't really seen infectious diseases causing extinctions in the same way that it has been causing extinctions in amphibians as in other taxas. But unfortunately, chytrid fungus has now caused declines in over 500 different species of amphibians, specifically in frogs, though it has caused declines in salamander populations as well. And so there are, along with chytrid fungus, there are a number of other infectious diseases that are causing serious conservation concerns within herpetofauna populations.
So given the fact that both birds and herpetofauna, which are referring to reptiles and amphibians, they're facing a suite of threats. But thankfully, organizations like Georgia Audubon and the Amphibian Foundation exist to address those threats and to make sure that we are making the spaces that humans occupy livable for wildlife, because we need them. So for specifically thinking about birds, Kiana talked about how windows are oftentimes invisible to birds because that's what they're meant to be, right? We put windows so that we can see through them, and birds see through them and don't know that they exist. So Georgia Audubon is working to make these city landscapes more safe for birds. And so we have programs such as Project Safe Flight, where we will go around to houses, buildings, organizations, and put decals or like stickers or films over windows that are appealing to the human eye, but are allowing birds to be able to see windows so that they do not accidentally fly into them and lose their lives. And we will actually later on during this program be meeting a survivor of a window collision. I think you all will learn a whole lot by meeting him. And then referring to the light pollution that Kiana mentioned as well, songbirds, which are most of the tiny Tweety birds that we see outside, right, are usually awake during the day and asleep at night, much like us. But when they're migrating in the spring and in the fall, they migrate at nighttime exclusively. And so when they are traveling through cities that have lots of bright lights, they get disoriented and they end up circling around the city, disrupting their migration. And so Georgia Audubon encourages large organizations who work in the skyscrapers, as well as people who just live in homes, to help birds migrate overnight by turning out their lights at night. It's called Lights Out Georgia. And this kind of pledge gathers a lot of people to join in making migration a safer experience for birds. And then of course, addressing the lack of habitat, right? In the built environment or in urban environments, there are a lot of artificial or man-made structures that aren't really usable by birds as nesting and feeding locations. But if we can get people to use the spaces that they have, whether they be at their home or at their work or at their offices, wherever there's a green space, make it a place where birds can live. Plant plants that they like to eat from, plant the plants that their food likes to eat, such as insects, and even providing bird houses so that they can build nests reliably year after year in places where humans are living as well. Henry is going to now tell us a little bit about how herps are protected here in Georgia as well.
Thanks, Karina. Very similar to birds, there are a lot of different ways that we are and can contribute to herpetofauna, as Karina pointed out, amphibians and reptiles. There are lots of different ways that we can contribute to the benefit and conservation of reptiles and amphibians. A number of them we do here at the Amphibian Foundation. There's a lot of work that can be done with habitat restoration, very similar to what Karina was talking about in terms of providing habitat in urban centers for birds to use. You can also do that in the natural spaces where herps normally occur, as well as providing and making your environments at home more herp friendly, not using mosquito spray, using less herbicides, just basically trying to have your lawns be as natural as possible. Plant wildflowers, maintain leaf litter. Leaf litter is so crucial to maintaining biodiversity within your yard. So during the fall, put the rakes and the leaf blowers away and just let it go wild. I highly recommend that. Here at the Amphibian Foundation, we also participate in a lot of captive breeding and release programs, specifically with pictured right here at the center at the top is the striped newt. That's one of the species that we breed here at the Amphibian Foundation and then try to release into the wild to bolster populations. Also, I am a wildlife disease ecologist, and so the infectious diseases like chytrid fungus hold a special place in my heart concerning the conservation of amphibians. And so disease surveillance, understanding where diseases are occurring in which animal populations is really, really crucial to understanding how we can best protect them. And so constant research and concert with disease surveillance and all these other conservation measures can help us all create lasting positive change for reptiles, amphibians, birds, and all native and all wildlife and plants in Georgia.
So thank you so much. So if there are any questions about the information that you just heard about Georgia's wildlife and ecosystems, you can feel free to throw them in the Q&A or in the chat. But now we are going to get to the fun part of the program. It's all fun in my opinion. But we're going to meet some wildlife that is both native to Georgia and some that are native to around the world to give you an up close look at the at the lives and structures and appearances of these animals that many people don't get the chance to see up close. So we're going to show you a little bit of a few of these species right now. And again, as we're talking about these animals, please do feel free to throw your questions in the chat, are introducing you to them. So we've got Crystal and Henry who are going to go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Karina. Oh. Okay. Hopefully y'all can hear me. Yes, we're good to go. We're looking good. Awesome. Okay, so first up, we are going to introduce you all to Phil, who is a very feisty young savanna monitor. This species is native to sub-Saharan Africa, being the large swath of land directly below the Sahara. This animal is native to across the entire width of the continent, from Senegal on the west coast all the way over to Sudan. They live in dry scrublands and grasslands, as you might have guessed based on its name. They have the really, he's currently in shed, so this is, you know, one of the key characteristics of a lot of reptiles, in that they will shed their skin as they outgrow it. So he's going through that process right now. It's really excellent camouflage, coloration, and patterning, being that he has coloration and patterning that helps him blend into his surroundings to help evade predation, as well as keep himself concealed while stalking prey. Though Phil has some relatively easy prey to go after. As you all can see, Phil has a very blunt and strong looking jaw and head. And this is because Phil and other savanna monitors specialize in eating mollusks. They love to eat snails and other invertebrates that have pretty crunchy exteriors, like millipedes and centipedes. And so this is a really cool thing for all of you up and coming wildlife biologists. When you meet a new animal, it's really fun to look at what its body is like. What are the shapes and sizes of its head? How is its color different from other animals? Because when you're a wildlife ecologist, you're always looking at how is its form, its shape, informing you about its life history. And so when you look at Phil, you can see that it's clearly needing to eat something very strong. So we're going to go ahead and say goodbye to Phil and meet another critter real quick. We're going to move on to the, there we go, Argentine horned frog, also known as a Pac-Man frog, which are a little difficult to hold sometimes. It's puffing up right now, which is a defense mechanism that a lot of frogs will do when they feel a little threatened. So hopefully our Pac-Man frog here will chill out a little bit. This species is native to Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil, so endemic to South America. This is a sit and wait predator, obviously called a Pac-Man frog because of its significant resemblance to the character Pac-Man. It's mostly just one big mouth. They are pretty opportunistic, meaning that they will eat basically anything that crosses their path. Insects, small rodents, small lizards, even other frogs. There are a lot of different colors that these frogs can come in. They're very popular in the pet trade. So a lot of breeders have turned them into, you know, beautiful, bright yellows and reds and such. But pretty typically, this animal is some combination of green with these brown speckling and patterns on the back, which helps it, again, blend into its environment to conceal itself from both predators and prey, again, since it's a sit and wait predator. And these horns on its head kind of cover up its eyes so that if an animal is viewing it from above, it doesn't see the eyes of the frog. It helps it blend into that leaf litter. And then before we put this animal away, I'm going to tell you why I'm handling this creature with gloves. Amphibians have very, very sensitive skin that they need and use to absorb water and oxygen and other really important chemicals from their surroundings, but they're very, very sensitive to the chemicals that you have on your body. So potentially you're producing, even your natural oils that are produced from your skin can be harmful to amphibians if you just put on mosquito spray or something like that. That can be really damaging. So it's really important to handle amphibians with clean skin or most ideally with gloves. So we're going to say goodbye to the Pac-Man frog and meet another really amazing amphibian that is native to the southeastern United States. This beautiful creature that Crystal has is Louie, the tiger salamander. This is a close relative of the frosted flatwood salamander that we were learning about earlier. This is another mole salamander species, the largest that we have here in the eastern United States. They can get pretty large, upwards of, I believe, 13 inches. They have a really cool life history in that they also will be moving from their ideal woodland habitats that they're usually in during the non-breeding season. They move from those habitats to the wetland habitats, to seasonal wetlands in order to breed, where they will congregate in large numbers. A really cool thing, they can be very well adapted to different weather patterns. So if there are periods of drought that reduce resources while they're in their larval form, they can actually metamorphose into a crazy cannibalistic form with certain larvae developing really large jaws that they will use to actually predate upon their siblings, so they can kind of overcome that drought and survive until adulthood. So a really cool way of working through hardship. And so with that, I think we're going to move on to our last animal of the day. We're going to meet another reptile now, another really amazing and beautiful resident of the southeastern United States and a native to the coastal plains of Georgia that Karina was telling us about earlier. This is Charlotte. She is an eastern indigo snake. I believe this is one of, if not the largest snake that we have here in North America. They can get to be upwards of 8 feet long. And for those of you who are wondering, this is a non-venomous species. I would absolutely not be handling a venomous species without the proper equipment. Please do not free handle venomous snakes. Really just, unless you're a trained professional and you know what the snake is without a shadow of a doubt, I highly recommend to just leave snakes be. They don't want to hurt you as much as you don't want to be hurt by them. Venom is very, very costly for venomous species to make, so they really don't want to utilize that. Most snakes just want to be left alone or are pretty nice. Charlotte is one of our favorite education animals. She's really personable to work with. And she also loves to, this species loves to live in gopher tortoise burrows. We saw a little bit about that species of tortoise earlier on in the presentation. She belongs to the non-venomous group of snakes called the colubrids. Let's see, you can see that she, I think, maybe recently shed. You can maybe see that iridescence of her ventral scales there. Beautiful, beautiful animals. So if you guys have any questions about any of the animals that you've seen today in the presentation, please feel to drop a question in the Q&A section, and we would be happy to answer it in the rest of this webinar.
Yes.
Alrighty.
They have been asking some good questions that I've been answering via the chat, but people asked, you know, is it strong? And I responded that this is, being a constrictor, they are relying on the strength of their bodies to kill their prey, given that they squeeze their prey really tightly. So they are quite strong, and people just being excited about the salamander Louis, because he is truly an incredible species. Now we are going to move on to our final animal of the animal introductions. Remember, I mentioned that we would be meeting a bird that survived a window strike, and this is a very special member of the Georgia Audubon community. I call him our feathered co-worker. So we're going to be meeting Sibley now, and Melanie Furr will be introducing him. So Melanie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. Let me turn around my camera so you can meet Sibley. Sibley is just finishing up his bath time today, actually. So Sibley, as was mentioned, oh, sorry, buddy, was injured in a window collision. Here, let's give him a second. Can you hop on your perch, buddy? He was injured in a window collision about 2 years ago when he was just a fledgling hummingbird. So he just had a couple of ruby speckles. So Sibley is a male. He's got that full ruby throat. Female hummingbirds have a white throat to help them camouflage and blend in with their environment. They're the ones that are doing all of the child rearing and child care. And so hummingbirds are found throughout Georgia during the breeding season. They show up in spring, early spring. They'll start to arrive back in Georgia from their wintering grounds in late March, and they will nest here in spring and summer. And then in August, September through October, they begin to leave. And they are mostly gone now. There might be a few stragglers left in the southeastern United States, but they make an amazing migration across the Gulf of Mexico in the winter so that they can meet their needs for the winter. They are nectar eaters, as you probably know. They drink nectar from flowers, but they are also aerial insectivores. They fly around and catch small flying insects on the wing. So they will leave during the winter so that they can find those insects and flowers that they need. Sibley can't fly. He was injured in a window collision, as was mentioned, but he can flutter and hop from perch to perch and sidestep from perch to perch. He really relishes his bath. As you can see, his feeder is here. He's always got food at hand because they have an incredibly fast metabolism. If we could metabolize the sugars that hummingbirds metabolize in a day, we would drink a Coke every minute of the day for 12 hours. So think about all that sugar. So thank you for letting me introduce you to Sibley. And I hope you all will treat your windows, plant native plants that are flowering and attract the insect life that hummingbirds and our other birds need.
Yes. We had one question I think it's worth bringing up, Melanie. There are a couple people who said, I want one now, like I want a hummingbird now. If you wouldn't mind kind of describing just how much goes into taking care of this very tiny bird for everyone listening.
Yeah, so I just kind of mentioned in passing about that metabolism, how they metabolize in a tremendous amount of food. They're eating twice their body weight every day. So although Sibley can feed himself, his mobility is limited. And I never leave him for more than, 2 to 3 hours without checking on him. So it's kind of like having a baby or a toddler. You check on them, you're with them, you get babysitters for them if you have to leave home for a while. And it was quite an extensive permitting process to get to keep Sibley as an education ambassador. So I encourage you to definitely learn more about animal care and bird rehab, but just know that it's not easy. It's definitely a commitment and a labor of love.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And you all, it's very special because Sibley here is the only ambassador hummingbird that we know of in the world. Hummingbirds are extremely difficult to keep alive in human care. And usually if they suffer a debilitating injury that prevents them from flying, they usually don't survive. So the fact that Sibley has survived for 2 whole years in Melanie's care here speaks firstly to Melanie's incredible animal care skills and attention to detail and as she said, labor of love and giving Sibley a great life when out in the wild, he certainly would not have been able to survive. It's being able to see one this close is a treat because they move so quickly, right? They have wings that beat so fast that you can hardly see them. It almost looks like they're an insect, and they move so quickly that you don't get to have a really up close look. And those feathers on the throat there, Melanie, if you wouldn't mind taking a second to just describe what they're seeing as far as that color change.
Yeah, so it's only the males, as I mentioned, that show the ruby colors. And those colors are actually an optical illusion. The feathers themselves are actually a dark slaty gray, almost black. And it's only when the light is hitting them a certain way and it's scattered and reflecting red light back to our eyes, kind of the same way our eyes are fooled by a rainbow or the colors in a soap bubble or an oil slick. So it's all a trick of the light. There is no red color in those feathers at all. And you can see him fluttering his wings. Karina mentioned how fast their wings beat, 40 beats a second.
Well, thank you so much, Melanie, for taking the time to introduce all of us to Sibley. Even if I was just here by myself, I would be having a grand old time. So it's always a great treat to learn more about Sibley and to see him up close. So thank you for sharing him with us. And with that, we are going to say goodbye to Sibley and to Melanie and thank them for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Melanie. So we are now going to move into the final section of our program today and talk a little bit about what it looks like to have careers in conservation. There are all kinds of different experts, fields of study, fields of expertise that exist within the realm of saving wildlife. And all of us have had different experiences getting to the careers that we are in today, have different expertise. And so we're going to have a short, just a Q&A session to learn more about how we came to the careers that we are in with some questions that I have for us to answer for you. So I'd like to start with Kiana. Kiana, if you would not mind describing to us what it is that you do and some of the key experiences that set you on track for the job that you have now. And your mic is muted, just so you know.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so once again, hi everyone, my name is Kiana Leverett and I am the Education Program Coordinator, which essentially means that I help coordinate all of the programs that Georgia Audubon does when involving education. And I would say some key experiences that got me here, one, first and foremost, would be the fact that I went to an HBCU that had a deep concentration in environmental education and animal science. And so I gained a lot of experience there in just cultivating a love for the outdoors, as well as understanding how to apply that to the community. And I've always been super, super passionate about telling other people about the outdoors. And so I've jumped around a lot through different experiences. I've had the chance to work for state agencies, federal agencies being the Forest Service, as well as I've interned and done field research before. And throughout all these experiences, the things that have helped me and made me realize what set it apart was, one, having different experiences makes you realize that those experiences are possible. Before I did field research, I didn't think I could do field research. Before I worked for a federal agency, I didn't think I could work for a federal agency. And before I was an education program coordinator, I didn't know until I tried. So my encouragement to all of you guys is to just try to go out to do something that you maybe wouldn't think is something typical that you would challenge yourself to do. But I encourage you to challenge yourself to just try something different and step outside of the box and learn more about what you like and what you don't like, because you'll never know about something until you try.
That's incredible advice, Kiana. Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing your perspective. We'll go ahead and move over to Crystal. Crystal, same questions. Would you mind describing what it is that you do with the Amphibian Foundation and the key experiences that set you on track for the work that you do to save wildlife now?
Yes, definitely. So I'm the Director of Education for the Amphibian Foundation, and that means that I create classes for students ages 3 to 18 about amphibians and reptiles. So with my education team, I work to help kids understand how amazing amphibians and reptiles are and why they're important to our environment and our planet. So we've created classes like Critter Camp, Snakes of the World, baby turtles, magical amphibians and reptiles, and Pokemon in their real life reptile and amphibian inspirations. And it comes to be that I'm happiest when I'm able to put a frog or a snake in the hands of a child for the first time. So seeing the joy and the wonder on their face makes it all worth it for me. And when a child realizes how amazing one of these animals is, I know that they'll be able to teach those around them about the importance of conserving these species. And that's why I do what I do. And 13 years ago, I realized that I loved amphibians and reptiles, and that completely changed the course of my life. And so I would say to anyone, trying to figure out where they want to go with their career, I would say, not to be afraid of changing your mind. So just like Kiana said, try out different things, intern with different places, volunteer at different places and see what works for you and see what really sparks a love for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Crystal, for that perspective. We'll go ahead and pass it over to Henry now to describe the work that he does currently and has done in wildlife conservation specifically, and the path that took him to that point.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, hey everyone. Again, my name is Henry Adams. I am the Assistant Director of Education here at the Amphibian Foundation. I am a wildlife disease ecologist. I just finished my master's in that field this past July. I have been working with amphibian diseases and conservation for a good long while at this point. I worked with salamanders in Costa Rica and their diseases and conservation and ecology for 3 years, which was truly just such a fantastic experience. I'm very, very grateful for that. Very much like my colleagues, I have had a lot of formative experiences that just kind of cemented this sort of lifelong appreciation and love for wildlife and nature and wanting to understand it as best as I can. And for me, one of the pathways outside of research in terms of connecting with wildlife has been art. I think that art is a really powerful tool for not only self-expression, but also just connectivity, whether it be between you and the natural world, or it be between you and other people, or between the trifecta, between you connecting with people, connecting with the natural world. And so as I've kind of sunk into my career and, started to visualize a pathway for myself, I've realized that I never want to be outside of the intersection of all of these things, outside of the intersection of research, outside of the intersection of research and art and human communication and equity within conservation. I think that, and I think that while a lot of people may see, they find that to be a relatively unique combination of things, I think that it can be enormously powerful. And a lot of my coworkers, as they can tell you, are also deeply connected in the arts. And I think that they would agree that has really shaped the way that they also have developed their career. And I guess the best little nugget of advice I have before we move on to some of the other questions, just to kind of piggyback on what everyone's been saying, is try to, obviously this is difficult to do in certain situations, but be as fearlessly authentic as you can. It's difficult to do that in a world, especially in a profession. While it's no secret that wildlife conservation is, a pretty relatively exclusive in terms of gender and race, and sexuality and stuff. It's a white man's game, and so in terms of that, I think that being as true to yourself and knowing who you are and putting that out into the world, it can be very, very scary. And as long as you feel safe doing that, I think that is your best way to success and happiness in any field that you choose for yourself.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Henry. That was such a powerful answer. When it comes to me and my career, so I'm currently the community engagement manager. So what you might notice is that all of us have had specialties an interest in science in particular, but we also operate very heavily with sharing our love for wildlife with other people. So my background training is in biology, but specifically the study of birds. But before I studied birds, I'm also a graduate student right now conducting research. I was a zookeeper. When I was young, I loved wildlife, but I was from the city and couldn't really afford to participate in a lot of the outdoor activities that were offered, if any, in my city. So I thought I was supposed to be a veterinarian because that's all I knew. I found out that my local zoo, the Philadelphia Zoo, offered internships for high school students, excuse me, and I ended up applying and interned and got experience in animal care and education, and I realized just how many different kinds of careers existed for people who liked to work with wildlife. And so realizing that would have only came because I put myself in a position to learn. And so I would encourage you that if you are someone who's interested, maybe possibly in a career with wildlife conservation, to kind of connect with your local conservation organizations like zoos or national parks or city parks that you have near you where there are education programs offered, and plug in. I would also encourage you, if you maybe have no idea, what you want to do, but you have somewhat of an interest in the outdoors and wildlife, go outside and explore the space where you are. If you live in a city, that does not mean there's no wildlife around. In fact, Atlanta in particular has more trees than any other city. So I would encourage you to explore outside. And so once I kind of got into the career of zookeeping and decided I wanted to participate more in research, I started looking for graduate professors who studied what I wanted to study, called them up and I said, hey, can I be your student? And that's really kind of how it all ended up happening. But there are a couple of questions that have been raised in the chat that we're going to answer right now. But before we do that, we do want to reiterate, to stress to you that to participate in wildlife conservation and contribute to wildlife conservation doesn't mean that you have to be a scientist, doesn't mean that you have to work in science at all. You can contribute to wildlife conservation from any field, whether you're in business or you're in engineering, right? For example, right now, there's a lot of technology being developed that helps biologists to study wildlife. So you may not work in science, but you work in technology. If you're an engineer who's designing buildings, thinking of ways to make buildings more sustainable and friendly to wildlife, there is room for pretty much every profession, including art, as Henry answered and shared with us, to contribute to the protection of wildlife. So one of the first questions that we have here is, what was the most difficult thing you strived for that got you to where you are now? Kiana, if you want to go ahead and take this question, I'll pass it to you.
So I would say the most difficult thing that I strived for, and you touched on it earlier, Karina, was really just to find something that I was passionate about. Very similar to you, when I first went to college, I went for animal science, and I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian, and then I thought I wanted to be a journalist, and then I thought I wanted to open a wildlife sanctuary. But eventually, just getting to the point, I realized that I wanted to do conservation, and getting to the point of realizing specifically what it was that made me want to keep going, what it was that I wanted to share with the world, was really what led me to this sort of career. I realized that I'm very passionate about community. I'm also very passionate about conservation. And the best way to combine both of those is to educate people so that they know better and do better and share that love and that cultivation that they have found for themselves with everyone else. So I would say when it comes to striving for a passion, never be afraid to pursue your passion just because it doesn't look like everyone else's. Never be afraid to pick a career for yourself just because it doesn't sound like a career. Because I can speak for almost everyone in this room that when we told everyone we were doing environmental science for our careers, everybody said, what kind of career is that? And there are so many. So I would say just find something that you're passionate about. That's the hardest part. But once you find something you're passionate about, your path becomes a lot clearer.
Thank you so much, Kiana, for that insight. Another question that was raised in the chat was, what are some of the pros and cons of your job? And Crystal, if you want to take this this question, what are some of the pros and cons of the job that you have here at the Amphibian Foundation?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the pros for me, like I said, was just seeing the joy on kids' faces when they touch their first Savannah monitor, or, you know, get to have a little froggy in their hands. And that's the best part for me. Maybe one of the downsides is that sometimes you get bitten by an animal. And that's not always the most fun, but, you know, it kind of comes with the territory. So you kind of just like brave yourself up, and you just kind of get ready for whatever kind of can come your way. And just know that you need to be really gentle with these creatures because they're just trying to protect themselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Crystal. Henry, I'm going to pass it to you as well. How would you describe some of the pros and cons of your job now, or jobs that you have had previously in conservation?
I can tell everybody now that you can hear me. I am relatively fresh to this particular position here at the Amphibian Foundation. I joined in September. So I completely still have my rose-tinted glasses on. I mean, truly, this job has been something that I've been, wanting to achieve for over a year. After in my last year of graduate school, I started to put out feelers and try and figure out what my path was going to look like. And I really fell in love with education. I had the, in graduate school, I had some really fantastic opportunities of teaching study abroad courses down in Costa Rica. And so being able to engage with students in the field as I'm teaching them how to handle amphibians, how I'm handling reptiles, birds, et cetera, teaching them to design their own methodologies for research. That is truly just so fantastic. I would say that getting bitten is definitely one of the main cons of the job. When I was a research technician down in South Florida working with white ibises, a really beautiful wading bird in southeastern United States, I definitely kicked an alligator on accident. And that scared the bejesus out of me. It was underwater, I couldn't see it. I was trying to take a picture of a great egret, another wading bird, and I was shuffling through, some waist deep, dark water, and I kicked something, and I was like, I hope that was a log, and it wasn't, and it slapped its tail, and it was fine because, again, it didn't want to get hurt, and I didn't want to get hurt, so we just left very quickly. But so that's, bit scary, but I would say that one of the most challenging things, and I guess this turns into more of a another recommendation to piggyback on what everybody's been saying, to emphasize that point of find what you're passionate about, find people who are going to support your passions. Find your team. For any Parks and Rec, Crystal knows what I'm talking about. For any Parks and Rec fans out there, in the finale, I believe that Amy Poehler's character, Leslie Knope, was saying, go out there, a good team makes good work worth doing, or something like that. And finding your team, I think, is so crucial, because if you're anything like me, a very, very extroverted person who feeds off of the energy of people around them, that makes me sound very vampiric. I really appreciate and love that, that kind of positive, nurturing energy. When you're a team of one, like I was during graduate school, I was in the mountains of Costa Rica by myself for weeks and weeks, and that really took a toll. And, maybe it helped me realize how much I need to have people like that, like the people that have been co-hosting this, this wonderful webinar with me. It's like, this is my team. This is part of what makes this work so worth doing. So go out and find your team.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Henry. I just now put 2 links in the chat. So if there are any of you who are thinking about how can I plug in, how can I get experience, how can I learn more about careers working in wildlife or working in environmental science, there are 2 programs to think about. One, Georgia Audubon offers a program called Atlanta Urban Ecologists, which is offered during the school year. So the next opening, I believe, is going to be, Kiana, correct me if I'm wrong, in the fall of 2020. Is that right? So click on that link to learn more about the program. And that is for people, students in grades 8 through 12. And then if you're looking specifically maybe to learn more about zoo related careers and what science and conservation looks like from the zoo perspective, you can check out that link. There's a volunteer program where young people can kind of get a look inside the professional world of zoo science. So take a look at both those links if you want to learn more, and definitely feel free to email any of us. You can get my contact information from your teachers, and we'd be happy to tell you more about our journey, our path, our perspectives, and anything that we can offer to be helpful. So with that, we are going to go ahead and close, and thank you all so very much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. And again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you, everyone.